Welcome back to Celeb Buzz. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest celebrity image collapses in recent Hollywood history and why people are suddenly revisiting years of interviews, jokes, and controversies surrounding Ellen DeGeneres. Let's get into it.
For years, Ellen DeGeneres looked untouchable. She wasn't just a comedian or a talk show host. She was a brand built around one simple message: be kind. Millions of viewers watched her every day. Celebrities lined up to appear on her show, and she became one of the most recognizable faces on television. The public saw someone who danced with the audience, gave away gifts, and encouraged positivity. That image was incredibly powerful because it made people feel like they knew her personally. But as Ellen's influence grew, so did whispers that the person behind the scenes might be very different from the one viewers saw on screen. Former employees began sharing stories that painted a far less cheerful picture of life inside the show. What made those stories resonate was the contrast. If a celebrity known for being edgy or rude faced criticism, many people would shrug it off. But when the face of Be Kind was accused of creating a difficult workplace, the reaction was far stronger. Suddenly, old interviews, awkward moments, and stories that had once been dismissed started getting a second look. Viewers who had spent years admiring Ellen began asking whether the brand had become more important than the reality. And that question would eventually lead to a much larger public reckoning.
The turning point came when reports surfaced describing alleged problems behind the scenes of the Ellen DeGeneres show. Former staff members spoke about a workplace culture they said included intimidation, favoritism, and fear. Some employees claimed they felt pressured to stay silent because working on such a successful show was considered a major opportunity. The allegations spread quickly because they challenged the very foundation of Ellen's public image. A talk show built on kindness was suddenly being discussed in the context of workplace toxicity. The controversy grew large enough that the show's parent company launched an internal investigation, and several senior producers eventually departed. Ellen later addressed the situation publicly and acknowledged that problems had existed within the workplace. For many viewers, that moment was shocking because it was one of the first times the carefully maintained image appeared to crack. People began revisiting stories that had circulated for years and asking whether warning signs had been overlooked. The conversation was no longer just about a celebrity being difficult. It became a debate about power, reputation, and whether Hollywood protects successful figures for as long as possible. Once that door opened, comedians, commentators, and former guests all started weighing in, and the public's perception of Ellen began shifting in a way that seemed almost impossible just a few years earlier.
As the controversy surrounding Ellen grew, many viewers began revisiting comments made by Gervais. Ricky has long built his reputation on mocking celebrity culture and questioning the polished images famous people present to the public. After the workplace allegations became headline news, some fans looked back at his jokes and interviews and wondered whether he had been hinting at something deeper all along. The reality is that Ricky's public comments were often comedic observations rather than verified claims, but in the middle of a major scandal, audiences started interpreting them differently. Podcasts and social media discussions amplified the idea that comedians sometimes notice things before the public does. Figures like Joe Rogan and other entertainers also discussed the contrast between Ellen's on-screen persona and the stories emerging from former employees. Whether people agreed with Ricky or not, his remarks gained new life because they fit into a larger narrative that was rapidly forming online. The more clips resurfaced, the more viewers felt there had been signs hidden in plain sight. What had once sounded like celebrity roasting suddenly sounded, to some people, like commentary on a carefully managed public image. And that shift in interpretation became almost as important as the original comments themselves. One reason the backlash grew so quickly was that viewers began re-watching old interviews with a completely different perspective. Clips featuring celebrities such as Taylor Swift, Mariah Carey, and Dakota Johnson spread across social media. In some of those interviews, guests appeared uncomfortable, caught off guard, or pressured into discussing personal topics. At the time many of those moments aired, they were often treated as harmless television. But after the workplace allegations surfaced, audiences began asking whether Ellen's interviewing style had crossed a line more often than people realized. The Dakota Johnson interview became especially famous because Dakota openly challenged Ellen during the conversation, creating a rare moment where the usual talk show dynamic seemed to flip. The Taylor Swift clip also drew attention because viewers felt Taylor appeared genuinely uncomfortable during a discussion about her dating life. Whether those moments were intentionally awkward or simply part of entertainment television became a major debate online. What mattered most was that public opinion had changed. The same clips that once generated laughs were now being analyzed as potential examples of a host using her position to make guests uneasy. That reinterpretation added fuel to the growing belief that Ellen's public image and private reputation might not have matched as closely as many people had assumed. To understand why the backlash became such a huge story, it's important to remember how significant Ellen's career had been. She rose from struggling stand-up comedian to sitcom star and eventually became a historic figure in television. In 1997, her sitcom featured a groundbreaking episode in which her character came out as gay, a moment that changed TV history and sparked enormous public debate. The decision carried real professional risks at the time, and Ellen later spoke about how difficult the aftermath was for her career. For a period, major opportunities became harder to find, and she had to rebuild her place in the industry. That comeback eventually led to The Ellen DeGeneres Show, which turned her into one of the most powerful personalities in entertainment. Because of that history, many people viewed Ellen not only as a celebrity, but also as someone who had broken barriers and changed television culture. That made the later controversy feel especially complicated. Supporters pointed to her achievements and the obstacles she had faced, while critics argued that past accomplishments should not shield anyone from scrutiny. The result was a public conversation that became far more nuanced than a typical celebrity scandal, with people debating legacy, power, and whether personal success can sometimes create an environment where criticism is ignored for too long. The controversy intensified during the pandemic when Ellen faced criticism over comments she made while broadcasting from home. Some viewers felt her jokes about quarantine sounded out of touch given how many people were dealing with job losses, financial stress, and uncertainty. Critics also questioned decisions related to the show's production and staffing during that period. What might have been a relatively small public relations issue under normal circumstances became much larger because the audience was already reassessing Ellen's image. The timing mattered. People were spending more time online, watching old clips, reading employee accounts, and discussing celebrity behavior. As a result, even minor controversies seemed to reinforce a growing narrative that Ellen had become disconnected from the everyday experiences of many viewers. Supporters argued that celebrities across the industry made awkward comments during the pandemic, while critics saw Ellen's remarks as another example of someone protected by wealth and fame. Regardless of which side people took, the damage to her public image was becoming increasingly difficult to reverse. The conversation had moved beyond a single allegation and turned into a broader reassessment of how one of television's most beloved figures had used her platform and power over the years.
As often happens with major celebrity controversies, the internet began producing increasingly dramatic theories about Ellen. Old photos, celebrity friendships, and social connections were analyzed for hidden meaning, and some online users attempted to connect her to broader conspiracy narratives. The important distinction is that many of these claims remained speculative and were never supported by public evidence. However, once a celebrity's reputation begins to weaken, rumors tend to spread much faster than verified information. Social media rewards shocking stories, and the line between documented facts and online speculation can become blurred. That created a situation where legitimate criticism of Ellen's workplace culture existed alongside much more extreme claims that were difficult or impossible to substantiate. For many viewers, separating those two categories became increasingly challenging. The result was a feedback loop. The more people talked about Ellen, the more rumors appeared, and the more rumors appeared, the more people talked about Ellen. By this stage, the story was no longer only about what had happened on a television show. It had become a case study in how quickly public perception can change in the age of viral clips, podcasts, and online commentary. Thanks for watching Celeb Buzz. If you enjoyed this deep dive into celebrity controversies and Hollywood's biggest reputation shifts, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. Do you think Ellen's public image was misunderstood, or do you think the backlash revealed the real story?